gotten your contact from Rich Shapiro, call him. Sherm will accrue the month of April, and Rich will take May. Then they will alternate months. Some of the details of accruing and payment are still being worked out, but call Rich or Sherm and leave a message, and then we'll get back to you with sage advice and wisdom. Ron was awesome, Bruce. On Monday, big meeting, election results, world watches.
Congrats to Marcus on his wedding.
On Monday, March 27th, we convened at the Clareton Hotel to celebrate and learn more about our new crewing system and other changes in our measly existence. Here are the results of the board member elections. John Ward, Aaron Stoikoff, Kira, Mike Ratusz, Pete, and Rick. And first runner-up, should Miss BAFA be unable to carry out the responsibilities of his or her office, Marty Cohen.
You are Miss BAFA.
Speaking of Marty, and we all do that, he gave an informative talk on disability insurance. As
Did
Marty
I write that?
pointed out, no, this is wrong.
Oh, ripping Marty twice.
To everything turn, turn, turn. There is a season, turn, turn, turn. And a time to every purpose under heaven. A time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, a time to reap, a time to kill, a time to heal, a time to laugh, a time to weep. To everything turn, turn, turn. There is a season, turn, turn, turn. And a time to every purpose under heaven. A time to build up, a time to break down, a time to dance, a time to mourn, a time to cast away stones, a time to gather stones together. To everything turn, turn, turn. There is a season, turn, turn, turn. And a time to every purpose under heaven. A time of love, a time of hate, a time of war, a time of peace, a time you may embrace, a time to refrain from embracing. A time to gain, a time to lose, a time to rend, a time to sow, a time for love, a time for hate, a time for peace. I swear it's not too late.
My name is Mike Ratusz. It's been Mike Ratusz almost all my life. What I was doing on November 9th was sweating it out, not sleeping, pacing back and forth, waiting for a phone call from NMT. That's what I did the entire night. Was on the phone with Greg about 50 times, and Don a few times, and Gene a few times. No dinner, and no sleep until the next morning when my phone rang. And it was NMT saying, we have to talk. And that's was the genesis of starting to meet and work out the situations. So.
John Ward,
Yes, sir.
that little table fan right there, is it
Oh,
shut off?
yeah. No, it will be now. Sorry. Okay, good start. Okay.
All right, that was perfect.
So, now you're just with me. That was just for the camera. So
Okay.
now you and I are just talking.
Okay.
And we're going to backtrack just a little bit, leading up to that point. Sorry. Oh my God, that was precious time.
not anymore.
Sorry.
Does your dog bite?
That was a champagne deal right there.
I guess.
Okay. So leading back early, let's start people out the crewing history, and that's a really big part of our tale. Early in the day, it was Jim Lynch with Hanks and Ross, and then a series of independent crewers. Can you give me a little roll call as you remember it? Starting with Jim, because Jim's a really big figure in this. He was never part of BAFA,
No,
but as a
but
crewer, and then the relationships that evolved out of both Diamond Vision and Giants
there
Vision.
was a crewer here when I got here in 1979, and his name escapes me at the moment.
That was before Hanks Ross.
That was before Hanks Ross. I mean, so what happened was this guy was the crewer, and he crewed, but I don't believe he payrolled. I don't remember, but so he decided that he was going to leave the area and do something else. So he took his notebook with all of our names and phone numbers, and he sold it to Hanks Ross, who were kind of unknowns in the area. Todd Hanks was a would-be camera operator, tape operator, TD, mixer. He went through all those jobs trying to find one that he could do. And then Scott Ross was, I believe, an audio person. And they were entrepreneurs, and they bought this book. And when Jim and Phil Martino found out about it, it was one of the most memorable meetings that we ever had in the Bay Area.
See, I don't know that story. Tell me really quick what happened.
We had a meeting at, I forget, some restaurant, and I was brand new. I moved here in April '79. This was like September of '79, so it was like one baseball season into my career here. And Jim and Phil and Greg and Vaughn and a couple other people that their names escape me again, were the nucleus of this crew. And they had been the guys who carried the crew. They were without doubt the most experienced and had the most expertise and the most professional group. And so when they found out that this crewer sold the crewing service to these two unknowns, they were very upset. And so they had this meeting, and it was John Claiborne was there and had a memorable moment or two. Anyway, what happened at the meeting was that Phil and John and Greg and Vaughn allowed these two guys to continue crewing. So they had the crewing service, but it was really contentious with the guys, with John and Phil and Jim. So after a while, it became evident that Hanks Ross was not going to make it because nobody would cooperate with him. Nobody gave him any loyalty. They didn't deserve any. So that's when, to my recollection, that's when Jim formed Full Facts, and he took the crewing. And he ran the crewing for I don't know how many years and did very well. And then when he moved into production, Vaughn took over and crewed for a while. And he did fine also. But when Vaughn started to expand First Camera and got into other things, that's when Jack Sheehan took over the crewing. And it was still Full Facts, I believe. So Jack did the crewing for like 2 years, I believe. And then one dark March evening, we get a call from Jack saying that he had just accepted the job as general manager of VTE in LA, and he would now be crewing us through VTE. So basically, we lost our central crewer.
Right.
And then each truck company then crewed their own shows, did their own rate structure, negotiated rates and length of days, and there's no even hint of benefits. And so that that lasted until we decided to form BAFA several years later.
So that bad situation when we lost our central crewer was maybe the singular biggest, driving force to us doing what we needed to do.
Well, what that did, that set a precedent. We knew that it worked, and we knew that it worked for us better than having all these multiple crewers in town. And just briefly, without getting into all the economics, these companies would bid against each other. The truck companies would bid against each other for the jobs when the teams would come in. And so, since all of their equipment was approximately the same cost, the variable there was labor. And so it was whoever could get their labor costs down to the bare minimum would then get the contract to do those games. So we became the pawn and the bargaining chip when it came to the truck companies bidding for these jobs.
Yeah, I think we've covered Derek's, kind of events that work up to the stoppage. Really quick, one event that was kind of central to us forming BAFA in the early days was the Jim Armentrout getting
Yes.
fired by Corey Bush.
Right, Jim.
Will Clark, they canned your buddy.
Yeah.
Can you just don't
Yeah.
need to drill deep, but because we put a bunch of
They
stuff-
hired Jim to do to run tape at the time for their home shows, and then they decided they liked him so much they wanted to travel him for their visiting shows. So he agreed to do that. That was great for him. So, but when he went on the road, they wanted him to share a room. And Jim decided that he was going to hold fast to, at the time, industry standards were just coming into play where freelancers on the road, actually any technician on the road, shared a room. So usually shared a room with one other person, one other guy.
We had fought for a long time
To get rid of that.
to get our own rooms.
Right. So that had just started to make inroads into getting our own rooms. They were just starting to accept it. And then the Giants told Jim that unless he was willing to share a room, he was not going to get the travel package. And if he didn't want the travel package, he would not get the home package. They fired him, in essence. So that was kind of a rallying cry. We all realized that was completely unfair. It like really brought the hackles up on everybody, mainly because Jim was he was such a good guy. He was a hard worker. He was very competent in his job. He was easy to get along with. He would do what he was told to do. He was a good employee. This was completely arbitrary that they would fire him over this one issue.
And do you recall what it was that we did?
I know that we called Corey Bush, who was running Giants Vision at the time, and we initiated somebody, I don't know who it was, came up with armbands in support of Jim. That was our first outward show of rebellion. So we all wore those to a meeting in Candlestick in the stands with Corey Bush. I think Jim was there. I think the Kuipers were there. Jeff was there. Anyway, we put forth our argument that we didn't think Jim should be fired from the whole package just because he wouldn't share a room on the road. Several people got up and spoke on his behalf. Actually, Corey was pretty open and fair-minded, and I believe at the end they gave Jim his job back. And so that kind of a light went on above all of our heads. It's like, oh, so if we all act together, we can get something accomplished. That was the first time any of us had ever acted in concert for one goal, and the one goal was to save one job. And we did it, and so that kind of sparked us to believe that all together in unity, we could accomplish even more.
Yeah, that was a big deal.
So it was huge.
So now we've touched on a couple of Derek's points of what led up to it. I think you've hit on how important it is that we formed BAFA. Let's hit a couple of kind of little fun things. You mentioned the crewing lineage. You left out Sherm. He was in there for a few months. Do you know the Sherm story? I'm going to ask everybody who knows. I'm going to ask if you know the Sherm story.
What happened was that we woke up one day after all this angst on November 11th or November 9th, and we got the crewing. They said, okay, will you have, but now we didn't have a crewer. So that's when Rich stepped in. Well, Rich stepped in, said he would form a company, a crewing service, and he would take care of all the payroll and everything.
There wasn't Sherm.
No, it was.
Wasn't Sherm well before and independent of Rich before we lost the crewing?
No, not that I remember. The reason that Sherm crewed was because Greg and I refused to do it.
But I think that was before Rich.
I don't remember that.
It was a short-lived. I think it was right before we lost the crewing. I think it was after Vaughn and Jack.
I don't think.
But you know what? Independent of that,
Yeah.
tell the story
so
about
what happened?
Without
So
wasting any time.
what happened was that Rich formed a crewing service.
It was Jack heading to VTE.
Yes.
Sherm stepping in.
Before Vaughn.
Before Samco.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
But just tell the story about him stepping in.
So
without
Rich formed the company Jayco, but he needed a crewer. He didn't want to crew it himself.
Before Rich, though. It was just him.
Well, then I don't remember.
But just him getting hit by the tomato is what I was looking
Oh,
for.
okay.
Yeah, and you don't have to do that. Right?
No, you can get somebody else can
Okay.
tell that one because that's not. I still don't.
That's all good.
Sherm's here, so he knows.
Yeah,
but
I thought a few voices about it, if you saw it or privy to it.
my recollection was that Sherm took over because Greg and I refused to do it,
Got it.
and Rich needed somebody to do it. So for a couple months he did it, and took a lot of heat. But if he hadn't done it, the whole thing could have folded up right there. So we owe Sherm a great debt because he bit the bullet and did it for a short term.
And a big tomato.
And a big tomato.
And a big tomato. So one of Derek's questions is what makes this market so special? And before I just ask such an abstract question, let me just throw out, and a lot of people have asked me about this. And at the time, we were a very tight-knit group. I mean, between Diamond Vision and Giants Vision, we all socialized a lot. We vacationed together, the houseboat. We touched on that. We helped each other move. We were in each other's weddings. You know, and
8 of us lived here in San Carlos.
And the San Carlos Mafia. So
Right.
if you'd like to start there, part of what makes this place so special is not just the fact the job is great and we've negotiated great, but it's just a great place to live, and we're lucky to know some of these people. And if we're not getting way too into it, I just start with maybe the San Carlos Mafia and what it is. There were all 6 of us.
I actually think the mentality of this group when we formed BAFA, actually I have to say came from the 4 main guys who were here when I got here, and that was Jim and Vaughn and Greg and Phil. They set a tone here of being professional and caring about your job and doing the best job you can do and being aggressive and not just showing up for work, putting your time in and then taking a paycheck. So those 4 guys, being a professional was really important. And so I think that that's kind of morphed into BAFA, the idea that we could do things on our own. But the idea that we were professionals and not just amateurs at this job started there. So when you go way back, I still give those 4 grandfathers the Mount Rushmore of the Bay Area. Not BAFA necessarily, but the Mount Rushmore of the Bay Area. So, you know, again, the recollection, we were doing Warriors basketball game one night after, I believe, Rich was either had already left NMT or he was about ready to leave NMT, and a woman named Julie was the manager of NMT. Charlene Soria Mansfield came to Greg and I and said, you guys got to do something because Julie and NMT are going to get rid of all the older guys and they're going to go cheap. So that lit a fire under Greg and I, and then we started to interact with other people, realized we needed to do something. That's when Gene and Sherm and Don Watt kind of came on board, and we just made it up as we went along about forming a group and calling meetings and trying to convince people to show up. But the camaraderie of the crew, of the people who worked on the crew, was pretty tight, and it's not so much like that anymore, mainly because we're so much bigger. We were only like 75 or 80 people. I think we were under 100 people to form BAFA. So it, like, you know, a bunch of us lived here in San Carlos. We all went to lunch together, went to dinner together, we socialized. So it wasn't a big stretch to say, hey, we can do something professionally together.
Right. Can you count off the San Carlos Mafia?
It was myself and John Ward and Rick Ratusz at the time, and Kira Kong, and who else helped me out?
Scott and Aaron.
Scott and Aaron, right. Scott McQuaid and Aaron Stoikov we all lived within like 4 miles of each other.
And we were the 6-person board of directors.
We were the very first board of directors, I think. One of the first. So, and so we used to have meetings at Vic's restaurant on San Carlos Avenue at El Camino, right there on the corner. We had like weekly board meetings there. I don't think they've had weekly board meetings since. So
I'm going to wrap you up.
Thank you.
But if you want to put just a bow on this, you know what? Maybe it was Camelot. Maybe the stars aligned. Maybe somehow we were wiser than we knew we were. Maybe we were lucky. Maybe all of the above. But it was maybe not a formula to be repeated or easy.
No.
But it's been a wild ride, and as your good friend and being along with you, thank you very much. And
Wow.
you know,
It was a group effort. I would like to say that there was a nucleus of 4 or 5 people who were the kind of the disturbers, stirring the pot, trying to agitate. But the big difference was the next 2 generations of people coming up, the young people coming up at the time, Dave Stagnaro, Chris Callerman, Leaf Martins, Marcus Therio, Joe Cuervo. Those are the guys that trusted us, and I think were smart enough to see that we were on the right track, and they were willing to put their careers on the line at that time. So I think you can find 2 or 3 or 4 people in every market that try and get things going, but we were blessed with a really good, solid group of people coming up. Marty Cohn and James Mansfield and Kira. All those people bought into what we were trying to sell and saw the wisdom in our fear of what would happen if we didn't do anything. And so when they bought into it, they made it the success that it turned out to be.
Okay, I said that was the last question. One more. One of the early meetings, I was young. They were always at hotel bars, at hotels that had bars, like the Clarion, all the airport hotels. And the meetings were always late, so like Benny and I always went and we had drinks. And then once the meeting got going, I was
You got
in the back
going.
wisecracking. And at one point, at a really important meeting, I'd had a couple of drinks and I made a wisecrack, and I got a simultaneous skunk eye from both you and Rick, and I'm wondering if you might just honor the camera with the look I got.
I don't think I could duplicate it because
Come
I
on!
was pissed.
Shoot me a
I was
skunk
pissed.
eye.
I was pissed then. I'm not pissed now. I turned into Ike, my evil twin, Mike and Ike. Rick and I turned around and just said, just shut up. If this isn't important to you, it is important to us. So either shut up or leave. And you guys stayed around.
Leave.
Thank
Still
God.
here.
Thank God you stayed.
And the camera's still rolling. Get out of my house!
Get out of my house. I'm leaving. You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you, Michael.
Thanks, that was awesome.
Yeah.
You tell me when you're ready. Are we rolling up top?
Am I being heard enough? I hope.
Let's see.
Testing. 1, 2, 3. 3, 2, 1. You want to load?
Just do a clap.
You're good.
Yeah, perfect. Got it.
You wanna-
Excellent. Howard, I'm having problems adjusting my balance.
Yeah. Do you want a lower octave? That's all I got.
Go to Fresno
Oh God, yeah.
together, we did
Well, that's what I said. We did.
XCTV,
We did
all the way up, right?
KMPH, channel 26.
Well, I mean, we'll touch on that later because we
Sure.
were all pretty
yeah.
good friends. Still
Yeah.
are. Thanks for coming.
Pleasure.
So I'm going to have everyone start by looking in here one time. Tell us your name, what you were doing around November 9th, 1993, and any just immediate memories of just that day. And then everything else can be in conversation here, but this is just a way of introduction,
Okay.
and maybe something will. So the floor is yours, sir.
November 9th, I remember vividly that I was at home, not working, that we had basically gotten a certain amount of unity among the people who did work to basically take a phone call, and instead of saying, yeah, I'll be there, to just say, yeah, I'll be there, but I want Rich Shapiro to be my crewer. So I'll work through him, but I won't work through you.
That's a good singular memory. And just now with me here, talked earlier, there have been other revolutions of technology. We as freelancers had some of the first answering machines around, and we used that to put that message out that you suggested that must have really been kind of a monumental moment instead of every single one of us having to explain our...
Yeah, I think...
It could be as simple as, hi, I'm John, I'm not here right now. If you're looking to book me, I'm available through Rich Shapiro, and here's his phone number.
Yeah, I think that when it all came about, when we made our decision as a group, that it really was very easy to just sit back and say, look, I'm perfectly willing to work, but I'll only work if Rich is the crewer. And I work for him, not for you. And this was dealing with NMT, with Maynard Video, and with VTE. And all three of them, we sat and gave the same answer. We sat back and said, happy to work. And we knew it was a busy day. We knew, because we planned it out, that this was going to be a high demand event. And they had to bring people in. They had to fly people in to do the jobs that we otherwise would have done, the jobs that we had done for the last 15 years. So it was a big move. It was a very big move.
The day in particular, home opening night for the Warriors, a triple side-by-side. Sharks, triple side-by-side, I think hockey night in America.
No, I don't think it was that. I want to say it was just a simple game, Sharks game. It might have been the opening game
Regardless,
at the arena in San Jose.
Multiple crews.
Oh, it was absolutely multiple
And
crews.
so can you tell the story, because I haven't heard that yet in the answers. So when we went out, they had to fly in 5, 6 complete crews?
They had to basically put their foot down in other markets that if you don't fly to the Bay Area and work, you won't work for us at home. So there was a lot of people who were pretty much blackmailed into working. There were some people who came from near places who ended up working and taking the job because they saw it as either just a simple payday or they saw it as an opportunity because there was a definite amount of risk involved that those of us who had said we're happy to work but not for you could have been blackballed. We could have lost our entire careers. And the true importance of the unity of that particular night is that we managed to hold together. And it wasn't a case of somebody sitting back saying, well, if a camera guy who's above me sits out, maybe I'll step in and do his job, because everybody sat together and basically looked at what the tactics were. And I think one of the things that people forget is that there was a letter that came out from Tim Abholt, who was the vice president at NMT. And Tim wrote a letter saying essentially that you veteran operators, you've been doing this for a while and you're supposed to move on. You aren't supposed to be doing this forever. You're working locally is just either a stepping stone to going national and working for a network, or getting out of the business, finding something else to do. And it was one of those things where we thought, we live in the Bay Area. We've got 2 baseball teams. We've got a basketball team. We now have a hockey team. We've got 5 or 6 major colleges in the area that do regular television broadcasting. This can be a full career without having to get on an airplane. And some of us did take the network jobs and go on. I worked a lot for Turner before I worked for NBC, but I still worked here. The thing is, Tim's letter was very, it was a real telling point to a lot of people that this is something I want to do. I want to work locally. I live here. I want to be responsible to people like Jim Lynch, Tom Adza, who I've worked for before. And at the same time, Tim made one of the most glaring errors when he went to the utility people and said, look, your rate was $120 a game last year. We want to take that to $75 this year. And that immediately told those young kids who are just breaking into the market, there's no future for you unless we change the paradigm. And the paradigm was, we take the crewing. We do it ourselves. It's not so much that we did it ourselves, but the crewing agent worked for us as much as for anyone.
Right. So, will you take that same point? Mike and Rick kind of drilled deep about Hanks Ross and the particulars, but you have a good grasp on the importance of an independent crewer in our market and the history of it.
Yeah.
And not so much the who's, but the whys. And you were touching on it there. And can you explain?
Well, yeah. Let me go back. Let me go back. I was post Hanks Ross. They were still crewing when I started doing freelance work, and the first freelance work I did in the Bay Area was working for Muley and Associates, and that was Peter Muley, son of Franklin Muley, who was the Warriors owner. And the other thing that really key to remember is before 1986, there was really no home broadcasting.
Right.
All broadcasts were the away show. So what happened is that Peter, Franklin's son, would put together the crew that would broadcast for the away team. When the Celtics came to town, they were live back to Boston and probably most of New England. But there was no local Warriors broadcast. When the Giants played, it was the visiting team. It was not the Giants. And the thing that was different about the crewing then, when I started, it was Jim, was second after my work for Muley. Jim had a company called Full Fax Video. The other thing, one of the key things to remember is the crew was small because there was only one truck. A lot of times it was only 4, maybe 5 cameras if it was a big show. 2 tape machines, audio, TD. Most of the time, Chiron was done back at the station. So there was a producer-director who sat next to TD. That was it. Producer-director, 2 talent. And they were the traveling people. So the thing is, when I remember vividly, I want to say it was 85, maybe 84, in March, Jim doing the crewing called us up and said, we need to have our annual meeting at my house in the Richmond, and the entire crew could easily fit into his living room.
And those meetings were crazy too.
They were pretty nuts. But it was, it was the Nick Utleys, the Tom Adzes, Vaughn, Greg, Mike, Rick, myself. But we could all fit in the living room. So it was a very small thing. By the time we got into changing everything around, Jim got the job with the Giants, sold his company to Jack Sheehan.
Right.
Jack put the crews together for all the truck companies, up until the day before baseball starts. And he gets a job as the vice president of one of the truck companies. And essentially threw his hands up and said, you guys are on your own, good luck. I'll continue crewing for VTE, my new company. Anything else, you guys are on your own. Well, we became the variable. We became the difference, one of the differences between the rates that the trucks could charge the baseball teams. And that essentially put us at their mercy. We had no power. We had to sit back and just say, well, okay, you got the job, we'll take the job. It was a pretty interesting time. It was a very unnerving time to basically be told, you guys are on your own. You know, there isn't a local crewer anymore because Jack moved to LA. It was not a good time.
Yeah, dark times.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the themes that people are talking about is, and clear when you speak, is this wasn't expected to be a career back in the day by those that were hiring us, and we had to fight for that. You have to fight to want to live and work in one of the most desirable places.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about
Well,
what makes this market so special?
Not just desirable, but expensive. It's
Well,
one of those
that's
things.
part of the equation.
It
That was
is.
always part of our collective
It is.
bargaining argument
But-
as well. But just with regard to living here, I mean, you lived in the same apartment for almost 4 decades. There's clearly got to be something
three, but yeah.
intangible about
Yeah.
this area.
Oh,
If you
sure,
can touch on that just a
sure.
little
I mean,
bit.
you know, I first lived here in 1968. My dad worked for Lockheed down in Sunnyvale, and I've essentially lived here the entire time, except for a few years up at college in Portland and 2 years in the Air Force. But it's just one of those things where, you know, this is you set roots. You know, it mystifies me that people can sit in places like Minnesota, you know, and get 60 below 0 degrees and sit back and say, well, this is home. It's like, no thanks. But the Bay Area, yeah, it's a special place. And it's special because it's a large enough market to have a complete career that you can make out of working for you can do just sports and have a pretty nice life. When we first basically were working back in the 80s, we not only did sports, but I worked for KQED, the public station. We did corporate TV for companies like Apple. I remember doing the Apple annual teleconference where they first introduced the laser writer, and you know, I remember going home from a rehearsal one day for the Apple teleconference, and it was the day of the Challenger disaster. But it was just one of those things where, you know, we would have those jobs, and they were there. But the thing is, the idea that somehow it just mystified me. It mystified, I think, all of us when we got that letter saying, well, you guys should be moving on. You guys have been doing this too long. It's like, well, why would you say that? We are like the solid crew in the United States. I don't know how many directors would come into town and say, God, I'm, you know, glad to see you. Good to be here. I know you guys will do the show. You know, give us a real quality product. And, you know, I mean, there were notorious venues in the country. You know, I don't want to mention any names right off, but there were places where the TV crew was essentially in the same union as somebody who climbed a pole for the telephone company. And they would get the jobs as much as anybody. And directors were horrified to see some of the crews they would get, but they would never get that in the Bay Area. And a large part of that is the amount of pride that we had in our work. And part of that, too, carried through to the idea that if somebody was new, we were going to help them. We weren't going to let them burn, because that was us. That was our reputation, too. And it was a pretty important part of our work ethos here in the Bay Area.
I'd love to hear your take on this. Awesome. One of the most important things in retrospect was the unifying of rates. Back in the day, if you rose to a higher rate by virtue of your work, you made yourself subject to being replaced by somebody at a lower rate. Once we got to that unified rate system, why would you hire? And it opened up training. It opened up, and it's a fascinating subject because it leveled the playing field and it loosened the reins, but it really promoted training and some other things that
Well,
really.
the thing, it is kind of hard to first understand it. You have to sit back and make the case that I, as a more senior operator, even then, you know, it was one of those things where like, well, I deserve more. But at the same point, you have to sit back and say, well, if somebody is going to, you know, come in at a lower rate, then my job's in jeopardy, or certainly my rate is in jeopardy. So the idea of having a single rate, you know, at some point you have to sit back and say, well, it doesn't matter to me, Because if I'm going to stand on what I can do, I'm going to stand on the relationships that I have, with the producers and directors around the country who come into this market. And they're going to kind of expect to see me on the shows. And if they don't see me, sometimes they'll get in touch with me and say, well, what's the deal? You don't want to work my show anymore. No, obviously not. So it was one of those things where I think you had to sit back and make the case that if somebody had been working in the business for a month, they should get the same rate as somebody who'd been working in it for 10 years. Because you rely on what you can do and how valuable you are knowing that person's show, rather than simply that, I'm going to walk in and I'm not going to Bigfoot someone.
Right.
And I'm not going to sit back and say, well, I deserve more than them. And the other thing too is you have to sit back and be realistic on what the rate should be. And at some point you have to sit back and say, well, this is enough. This works for me.
Good rate.
Always here. Yeah,
Yeah.
always.
And honestly, just in closing, I mean, I know of cases in Boston and LA where that was never the case. And so the senior most people were always cutting private deals. And the rate card was ridiculously low because it didn't reflect.
Sure.
And we never went down that rabbit hole.
No, I think, it's just one of those things that, again, it has to do with the amount of unity that we had in the group, especially when we formed BAFA. We sat back and explained to everybody that this is what we want. These are the rates we want. These are the working conditions we want. These are the benefits we'd like to get. Because at that point, you have to remember, we had no health care. And that was pretty important. And it's been important to me since then in a very big way. But it's just one of those things where you have to sit back and say, well, what did we have before? What can we get now? What can we get for you, younger guy? Can we build this career for you? And I think we have. There's been some bumps along the way. I think one of the issues, we got really big. And I think that degree of unity is much, much harder to get. And it's always been kind of interesting to me how some people just aren't that involved that should be, that some people have complaints, but don't really have constructive ways to deal with the organization to make those complaints go away. It's an interesting thing. I mean, it was a very interesting thing to begin the unit BAFA. Interesting times, the amount of coordination we had to have, the amount of taking everybody in and explaining to people, soliciting input from them, but also explaining to them that things like the rate structure is, and why it should be this way, and how somebody who's new shouldn't be threatened by somebody who's senior. That the idea of having BAFA isn't to lock somebody out of work; it's to guarantee a structure of work that might go on in the future. And I think it has, by and large. When you look at the amount of work that exists, I mean, just when we first started, like I say, there was maybe 7, 8 people. It's very different times now. I mean, sometimes there seems like there's 7 people in one single part of the show. Just say the cameras. It's pretty different. Pretty different.
Just
pretty amazing.
To wrap this up, and you are a great spokesperson. You put a lot of these ideas together in a way that we can digest. But at the end of the day, was it Camelot? I mean, did stars align? Were we really lucky? Did we have really great leaders? Was there amazing tradition?
Yes,
is it the best place to live? I mean,
yes, and I was one of them.
Yeah.
No, it's one of those things where we came in and we got involved in a very important time when sports broadcasting was really taking off. When I worked in the 80s on those small groups on the away shows, it was the beginning of regional sports networks. And some would rise and some would fall. I don't know if you remember Home Team Sports. There were sports groups that were in different regions of the country, and a lot of them failed. But by the time of 1993, the amount of broadcasting that was required for people, the live broadcasts were such an important part of programming that we had a stick that we could use by saying, look, if you want to work in the Bay Area, you better hire us because otherwise you're going to be putting people on airplanes. You're going to be getting hotel rooms, and that's not going to work for your bottom line. One of the key things we always wanted was for the truck companies to do well too, which was one of the, I mean, I was lucky enough to be chosen to kind of be the spokesmodel in the original meeting that we had the day after the work stoppage. We sat down in a meeting room with all 3 truck companies, managements. And the one thing is I think they saw that we weren't being predatory. We weren't trying to shut them down. We wanted them to make money. And I remember distinctly saying that no, we want you guys to do well too. But we also wanted to have a career and a way to make a living working in this market. And that was big. That was really big.
Awesome. You're fucking awesome, dude.
Nice shot.
They would tow a bus. It was a bus that they would tow up to the Bay Area to Candlestick Park or the Oakland Coliseum and
It would break
drop
down
it down.
in Bakersfield, and they would
Yeah.
get some independent tower to tow
Yeah.
it 400 miles or whatever. And
You had the little big knobby thing to open the door, and you'd walk up just like it was. It was a bus, and the director would sit right in the front. There was a little area for him, and then there was no separation of doors. There was no audio room. It was tape was on one side, audio was on the other. Video, the video's room was separated a curtain. It was a black curtain. That was their room, and that was the bus, which never ever went from point A to point B without having to be towed part of that way. So that's what we were up against, technically.
Give me a clap.
give me a clap.
Good.
All right. So I'm asking everybody to look here.
One more time. Clap.
Oh,
Got it.
that's,
Okay, cool.
that's how we sync.
Yeah, it's good.
It's 2020.
No, they can do it.
We're
It just helps
syncing
them out
things
even
up
a
with
little more.
a hand clap. So I'm asking everybody just to look in the camera for first of all. We'll
Okay.
talk after this. Your name and what you were doing in 1993 around November 9th.
My name is Rick Ratusz, and around the time that we did our unavailable day, work stoppage, said we weren't available to all of the truck companies, which were the crewers, I was nervous, and the reason I was nervous was not only for my well-being in the business, could have been the last time I ever worked a job, was the time before we stepped out, but was for everybody else younger that we convinced this was the only path for us. And we all could have just been replaced, but we weren't. It worked out well, but I was incredibly nervous by that, that great idea of convincing a lot of other people how to steer their careers. It worked out though.
Okay, now back to me.
Okay?
Okay, so it worked, right? I wanted to touch on with you. So, flash forward to 2008 and the Barack Obama grassroots internet campaign changes the world. We had a similar technology that changed the world. And do you know what I'm talking about?
I'm not sure I do.
Answering machine. And
Ah,
our
yes.
Outgoing answering machine message. Can you tell that story that we all put the same answering machine message out?
I'm not sure I remember that, John.
Okay,
So,
that we were available, but we were available
only through Samco.
But I mean, it's kind of interesting to think back because a lot of us have forgotten that we
Yeah.
were freelancers. We were the first ones to have answering machines. You had to have an answering
Right.
machine. That was the biggest high-tech thing.
Right,
You couldn't
right.
miss a call.
Yes.
But we had a way to use that technology to tell our adversaries, you can hire us,
We are available, but only through Samco.
and here's
It was our
Rich's phone
crew.
number, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Interesting. I just wondered if you remember that. 'Cause
Yeah.
That was like an obscure
Yeah.
memory that I had leading up to it.
Right.
Okay, so let's just change directions here. So we
Okay.
got you. Early meetings. We were meeting in secret at like airport hotels and stuff. And I don't know, it must be a little bit like the American Revolution or something
Yeah.
back in the day. Do you remember who it was that was, first of all, do you remember who decided what to call November 9th the day? I mean, in retrospect, it was a triple side-by-side.
Yeah, it was
Sharks, opening night.
opening
and
night,
home
Warriors.
Opener at Warriors.
Yeah.
But do you remember who came up with that, or was that a collective?
I think it was I'll go back a little bit to these early meetings. The one thing that stands out to me in those early meetings was that there were a lot of different ideas about how to get more control of our situation, having more control over how we get crewed and our rates and that kind of stuff. So there were a lot of different ideas, and a lot of it was spoken loudly, and there was a lot of yelling and screaming and even name calling, and I just remember them being high anxiety, but at the end of the meetings when we'd walk out, we kind of had a central idea of what we needed. And we needed solid rates, and we needed a central crewer, one crewer. And somehow all those minds, all those personalities, some of them incredibly strong, and a lot of them very intelligent, coming together and figuring out how we were going to do that.
So, name them out by name, and we've been talking, but will you say their first and last names? Who are the guys that were the building blocks when you were coming up?
Well, when I first got here, I was at the very end of the Hanks Ross era. And in fact, I was here about a month when Mike said, "We're going to a meeting. And I don't want you to say a word. You just be quiet. This is not for you." It was for me, but not for me to speak. And it was Jim Lynch, and it was Vaughn Kilgore, and it was Greg Overton, Phil Martino, and Mike Ratusz. Those were the main players who were going to this meeting with this crewing service named Hanks Ross, two guys. And it was definitely a solid, positive way to go was to get rid of Hanks Ross. They were all about themselves. They weren't at all about their fellow crewing members. So I came in right then. I don't believe I even worked for Hanks Ross. And that's when Jim Lynch took over the crewing with Full Fax Video.
So that's a perfect time for me to chime in because I've been waiting for this point. Jim has never been part of our union per se, and was out of the crewing business so long before any job actions were ever done. But it is so integral to the fabric of our community, the crewing legacy, the Bay Area excellence. Can you talk just a little bit about the early days? And there was Diamond Vision and there was Giants Vision, but to me, I think that was a backbone that built the community that BAFA sprung out of.
Well, the one thing that I remember, when I first moved here, my father was in television. He was a white-collar guy. He wasn't a technical guy, but I had a taste of what TV was about, what live broadcasts were. But I wasn't really thrown into it or knew much about it until I got here. And the one thing that struck me right away was how professional and caring about the craft that Jim Lynch, Vaughn Kilgore, Greg Overton, Mike Ratusz, Phil Martino, those guys wanted it to be an Emmy award-winning show every night, every day. And so they taught me that that was the way to be. You don't just come and wait for the director to tell you to do something. You took initiative and you made that show the best show that it could be. And that was, again, Jim, Vaughn, Greg, Mike Ratusz, and Phil Martino.
So they laid a groundwork, a legacy that, as I suggested, kind of builded built through Diamond Vision and up through Giants Vision. But part of one of the things we're getting at today is, and what makes this market so special is we've always cared about each other. And I was talking earlier about, especially back in the day, maybe there were fewer of us, but we socialized together. We vacationed together. We were in each other's weddings. We played golf every week.
Yeah.
We were neighbors. Would you mind just touching on maybe the San Carlos Mafia and then how that's a component to, the job is great, the landscape and the geography and the weather is awesome, but as a whole package, this is still the greatest place in the world to work and live, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things I can remember when I first started, and even a few years in, was we would go to a establishment to have a couple of cocktails, and we'd talk about the show that went on just then. We just spent 10 hours working, but we would socialize, and we were friends, but we would talk about that show, that event that we did. And then also when you're in the same neighborhood, you sometimes would carpool with 4 or 5 people. And so, of course we talked about things other than television, but it also was the vehicle, if I may say, for talking about the business and how we each thought of our careers and how it was going to play out. And, you got different ideas from different people, and that's because we communicated and we were friends. And to tell you the truth, even some of the people that we might have disagreed with, at the end of the day, everyone had the interest of the group in mind when they made decisions about how they were going to conduct themselves, either with rate or who they were going to work for, those kinds of things.
Can you give Derek a little soundbite about the fact that we vacationed together, went on houseboat trips, and we helped each other move, and we were in each other's weddings, and can you give me that in just a few of those little things, and a little roll call of some of the things that we used to golf and all of Hawaiian trips.
There was a time where we would play at a golf course called Peacock Gap. It's in San Rafael, and we would make 3 foursomes, maybe 4 foursomes, and we would have to turn people away because you just worked with someone for 4 or 5 days in a row, maybe saw them more than you saw your girlfriend or your wife or your kids, and then that day off, we were all battling to be one of the 12 guys to go play golf with each other. We were engaged with each other. That's for sure.
Let's see, market special. Oh, I have it earlier. So early on the meetings, we're meeting in secret. One time we were meeting in secret, and I drove up, and there was a big sign, "Welcome BAFA," like at the Clarion. It's like, oh my God, right?
Yeah, we've arrived.
And I mentioned earlier about me getting a little drunk in the back and getting yelled at. I want to at least get the skunk eye from you that you and Mike shot me that one time. You guys remember that?
I can remember. I don't know what my face looked like, but I can remember being really upset that we wanted to show everyone that we were going to be very serious and diligent, and we had all our T's crossed and our I's dotted, and we were taking the bull by the horns, and Don Rickles was back there behind there kind of putting a damper on that mood. And so you can imagine that the ones of us who were ultra serious, how we reacted to that.
Well, hopefully I righted the ship and made you proud.
John, you are an integral part of how we, maybe not started, but how we got to where we were going. We couldn't have done it without you. We couldn't have done it without Rich Shapiro. We couldn't have done it without Mike Ratusz and Jim Lynch. Those are some pretty solid future thinking minds that helped us navigate a place we had never. No one in the country did what we did. We were the first, and we didn't know what we were doing. We just navigated it the best we could, and it's guys like John Ward and Jim Lynch and Mike Ratusz and those kinds of guys that got us there.
Fishing for a soundbite, thanks.
Do you forgive him?
No,
Oh yeah, of course I forgive him, but he actually
No,
he doesn't know, but he doesn't remember.
I
But
was really funny too. I mean,
yeah, no, it was. But I also remember there was and this doesn't have to be part of this stuff, but we were negotiating a rate with the very first Diamond Vision at Oakland. They were the first board show in the Bay Area, and there were some young guys, and this we felt was our big opportunity. I was moving from doing audio, and I wanted to be a camera operator, and this was my first chance at doing a almost full-time camera. But the rate was really bad, and benefits and all that kind of stuff, and so we were kind of trying to put together a good package that worked for everybody, and you were very much like that, the class clown kind of thing. And, but yeah, that doesn't have to be part of this. But so you have a history.
I do. I still can't resist.
No. And again, John, you and Mike had this vision that a lot of the other really intelligent and those who weren't, you guys helped us get to where we were going.
Well, you know what? We were talking about this day, and this day was really important. But one thing I'm reminded of is that was just the starting point. And the reason why this is still the best place to work in the whole world is all the work that we've done since then.
Yes.
And it continues today. And it'll never be the same, and there's no going back. But, job well done.
Yeah.
I feel my head hits the pillow at night, and
Yeah.
we did good.
It was rocky, and sometimes we didn't know exactly what we were doing, but
We did
it
good.
worked out really well, and that's attributes to you guys.
Man, I love you so much. Hey.
Am I done?
How long was that one?
Yes, sir.
Like,